I welcome friends and family here today for the celebration of my mother, Janelle Gray. Today will be filled with her memories. My mother was courageous, a go-getter, and of course stubborn. She was what a mother should be and a role model that I will always look up to. I know she wouldn't want us to be sad for too long. Therefore, let's celebrate her just because she'll always be in our hearts.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Today we gather to acknowledge the death and celebrate the life of Janelle, someone who we all knew and loved. We meet here today in grief and sorrow. And we need each other in these times when we must face death and loss. We need to come together to look into one another's faces and take strength from each other, because pain is lessened in the sharing. So we have come here in mourning, but we have also come to celebrate a life. We are here in community to give thanks that we knew Janelle, to express our gratitude for the days and years we were able to share with her. She lived life deliberately, with passion and courage. And so we are together in the spirit of Janelle to share, so we are here together in the spirit of Janelle, to share good art, to speak our thoughts, to love life, and to connect again with a woman who touched all of our lives. By honoring the principles, values, and dreams which guided her life, Janelle helps us face the days ahead with resilience and generosity. We are here for mourning and for celebration. But our first spiritual task is to face, full and unafraid, the reality of this death and the grief and loss we feel. I have a chalice by you now. Though our spirit is a single flame, for the one who keeps it burning bravely to the end, death is not defeat. We light our chalice today to honor the life and living of Janelle, whose flame was a bonfire. Let's take a moment to watch a short video of Janelle practicing Hallelujah on a not-so-great piano. And I was hoping to get it from here to here. Did not get that accomplished. Hopefully I can get some audio for you. I had the best seat in the house. There was a little part in the middle where I'm sure you couldn't even tell. But Janelle thought she moved up, and the facial expression was classic. You should often watch it. It's centuries ago, the Roman philosopher Seneca wrote, "In the presence of death, we must continue to sing the song of life. We must be able to accept death and go from its presence, better able to bear our burdens and to lighten the load of others." Out of our sorrows should come understanding. Through our sorrows, we join with all of those before us who have had to suffer, and all of those who will yet have to do so. Let us not be gripped by the fear of death. If another day be added to our lives, let us joyfully receive it. But let us not anxiously depend on our tomorrows. Though we grieve the deaths of our loved ones, we accept them and hold on to our memories as precious gifts. Let us make the best of our loved ones while they are with us, and let us not bury our love with death. And I'm going to have Wayne come up and share a piece that he wrote.
So you have to speak right into the mic. So I'm like looking at that flower ring. So I'm Wayne Gray. I'm one of Janelle's brothers. And thank you all for coming today. Years ago, Clint Eastwood was in a movie, a spy movie called The Eiger Sanction. Anybody remember that movie? Okay. So in this movie, Eastwood and his co-star, George Kennedy, are rock climbing a spire in Utah. And they get to the top and they're just exhausted. And they're sweating and they're panting and they just kind of flop at the top. And Kennedy reaches over to Eastwood's pack and he pulls out a beer. And Eastwood looks at him, just kind of looks at him and like, I carried that all the way up here? Son of a gun. For years, Janelle organized family camping trips to the wilderness. And we would go 7, 8, maybe 10 miles in. And she would hire a horsebacker to get the gear up. And I would usually follow, a day or so later with my own pack. And I remember one of the first experiences of doing this with Janelle and her family. And after a brutal hike of hours, I finally stagger into camp. And here's Janelle in a lounge chair reading a book. Son of a gun, how do I get some of that? So many of you know Janelle from the most recent 20 or 30 years. But I'd like to go back to some earlier time. Now, my 50-plus year memories are a little dim, and I'm sure that the truth is also dim. So I may take a few liberties with the truth. But we grew up in Buffalo to an entrepreneurial family, and our parents started the Indian campground in the 1960s. And like a lot of families, the kids were conscripted at a very young age. And do you remember what you were doing when you were 12 or 13? Well, Janelle was doing the books, the accounting for the campground. So, reporting the income and the expenses and stuff like that. Now, back then, there was no computers. So Janelle did this with a calculator and accounting ledgers and pencil and paper. And back in the 70s, early 70s, the campground had about 25, maybe 30 employees. It was a pretty big operation back then, full and part-time employees. And Janelle did payroll for that many people every other week by hand. Now, while Janelle was doing the books, my brother and I got to work outside and run the tractor. I'm sure that my parents knew that my brother and I were not suited for that task and we weren't smart enough anyway. But our parents were also a little old-fashioned, and they didn't believe that girls should drive tractors. How do you think Janelle handled that? No, that wasn't too good. But Janelle's, her feminism and her sense of social justice and her progressive thinking started at a very young age, and of course continued until her death. A lot of you know that Janelle had a great sense of humor, and I think maybe some other folks will talk about that. But she loved puns, and she was a great punster. And Phil, her husband, is also a great punster. I remember in high school at a meeting, during the discussion, Janelle fired off a pun. Well, the teacher came back with one of her own, and then it was open season. Well, they went back and forth, and after a while, the teacher kind of, wound down. And so Janelle won the pun battle. And not too surprising, I think we would all expect that, except when you realize the teacher was an English teacher. The obituary mentioned that Janelle was busy in high school, and that is true. And I think out of desperation and maybe a little, some self-defense, my parents bought her a car. Now, this was not just a run-of-the-mill, nondescript car. No. This was a hot fuchsia VW. But it wasn't a Volkswagen Bug. I believe it was a Type 3 sedan. So you have to Google that and see what that looks like. For you ladies here, you know exactly what hot fuchsia looks like. For the color-challenged guys, let me help you out. Think bright, garish, purplish pink. That was the color of this car. And the Type 3 sedan was not very stylish. And I'm sure that Janelle got a lot of comments and, mean teasing about that car. Back then, that car was not cool. It was ugly. It was obnoxious. And it was embarrassing. I didn't want to see, I didn't want to go to school with her in that car. But today, that car with its wild color and its weird shape would be pretty cool. You'd want to be seen in that car. You might say that car was ahead of its time, just like Janelle.
That was fantastic. The next presentation I'm going to do for Roger, unless he's changed his mind. He's not saying it up. So I'm going to read this. This is from Roger Sanders, written for today. He titles it Comparison, not title, sorry. It starts with a quote. Quote, "Comparison is the thief of joy." I'll say it again. Comparison is the thief of joy. This quote is widely attributed to Theodore Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States. I can speculate that if Janelle had heard this comparison quote as part of a Sunday morning UU presentation, by the end of the service, she would have been ready to debate the probable flaw of that attribution to Kate. I can hear Janelle asking, why would a privileged old white man in the late 19th century, with an ego as big as the Dakotas, discourage his entourage from making the disparaging comparison of themselves to him? Bully. Or she could have argued something else. Janelle was a quick thinker, using common sense, her familiarity with history, science, nature, and the arts to reach logical, sound conclusions. And with a bit of research and writing time, she could have had a factual and witty presentation penned, polished, and ready for delivery the following Sunday, arguing that the quote was as likely to have come from Mark Twain, C.S. Lewis, or Dwight Edwards as from Roosevelt. But what about that comparison quote? Janelle was unique, without comparison, and will remain so in my memories for as long as I breathe. Her acts of kindness and generosity are attributes I can only strive to attain. Her skills of parenting, music, gardening, entrepreneurship, and wordsmithing are unmatched and beyond my grasp. Her willingness to share with her cancer buddies her hard-learned and personal experiences coping with cancer and the treatments was beyond reasonable expectations. But I refuse to let these comparisons diminish my joy of having known Janelle for more than 4 decades. I consider myself lucky to have known her as a friend, to have the memories of skiing, camping, eating, traveling, playing card games, celebrating, and mourning with her. My joys of knowing Janelle Gray will never be stolen by any comparisons. I don't know about the reading, but the writing was superb. Will Chris Corfante come up now? Share her piece.
Thanks. Well, this is intimidating because Janelle would have had such a witty, funny, thought-provoking talk. I'm not a writer, and I wrote it down so that I can stay on task. Janelle and I became friends first because of our mutual love of the mountains and backpacking to above timberline. I think it's where we felt most connected to the cosmos. On one trip, some of my favorite memories, and my family's favorite memories, has been on some of these trips, both pre-kid and post-kid. On one pre-Bill trip to a favorite lake that we always swore to each other we wouldn't tell anybody about, I was ruminating about some men who seemed interested in me, voila, me of all people, and just kind of confused. And in Janelle's very abrupt, matter-of-fact way, she told me she liked Bill and basically let me know, not in these words, but I was silly to think of anybody else. And she was right. Post-kids, we had great times planning and executing these trips that Wayne talked about with so much fun, just planning, and then we planned amazing clues for treasure hunts, and we had belly laughs, and we played in the tent the Great Dalmoody, and if you have not learned that game, I brought it with me so I could show you. It's become our family favorite. There are so many things I appreciate and admire about Janelle, but I'll talk about the two that are topmost in my mind right now. Her can-do, find-a-way attitude, and her focus on living life. Regarding her can-do, find-a-way attitude, examples abound. An obvious example is how she found ways to live fully with cancer over 25 years, researching and maintaining a strict diet using traditional and non-traditional methods, and so much more. When Janelle and Bill were unable to have children, this is another example. After all the work going to doctors, they tried to adopt. They were unable to adopt in the U.S., if I remember correctly, because they were deemed too old. So Janelle did the research and spent weeks in Peru and adopted Brenna, and then later weeks in Guatemala and adopted Ben. Then Maya came along after months of... And a lot of us still chuckle at remembering how Janelle chastised us not to tell her that she would become pregnant after adopting, because so many people did, and we had the last laugh. Some fun examples of her can-do, find-a-way attitude relate to our mountain trips. When I bemoaned not getting to the wilderness after having a new baby, Janelle said she would help carry Sky in, and we could use pack horses to get the other kids in and gear in. When our kids became older and could hike on their own, we went miles because Janelle would entertain them with stories as we hiked and kept them so engaged that the miles and the time flew by. When she could no longer hike into the wilderness area, she and Phil found ways to enjoy the mountains and many trips in their camper. Janelle's focus on life is aptly summed up by a phrase coined by Eliana, one of my new favorite phrases having to do with being alive for one's life. She refused to let cancer define her life and made very clear early on she would rather talk about other things. She did not want to be defined by cancer. She would rather talk about a women's studies course she was taking or new ideas brought up at the UU Fellowship or about her kids than the health struggles that she faced. She loved learning and thinking deeply, questioning the status quo. So conversations with Janelle were always lively and thought-provoking, and also a release of frustration about the world. Though Janelle devoted a huge amount of time and energy to defeat the effects of cancer, she focused on living and learning. She had a bucket list, and I think she ticked off more than any of us with longer lives will ever accomplish. She found an appreciation that cancer taught her not to take life for granted. I admire how she planned multiple trips and experiences for her family to enjoy together, and she planned side trips to state parks to make the long trips for cancer treatments into enjoyable, memorable experiences. Janelle's beautiful gardens reflect her focus and diligence and so much hard work at life. I've been thinking about this a lot this summer as I weed my garden. Janelle actually seemed to enjoy weeding and maybe found it to be kind of meditative, though I know she had a hard time at meditation. Janelle's planning and focus was bringing glorious gardens to life and not just getting rid of weeds. I'm trying to do more of that. I was shocked by Janelle's death because I took for granted that she would continue to beat the odds. No more taking life for granted by me. No longer allowing the weeds to define my garden. Finding reverence and appreciation for just being alive and cherish the times we have together. I feel so privileged that Janelle is such a big part of my life and my family's life.
There are strategically placed boxes and annexes everywhere. Okay, we're going to have Sarah Jane Wolf out now.
I met Janelle in an adult ed class soon after. The campsite was perfect, a lakeside setting, beautiful hikes, lovely weather. But what Janelle and I had fun remembering and laughing about were those cans and bottles, and that we had forgotten to bring mascara. In an email to Janelle last year, I mentioned that trip. Our first long hike after leaving that campsite was especially grueling, our packs laden with almost a week's worth of food. We walked longer than intended looking for water. To keep our minds off the labor of every step, we sang John Prine songs with repeated rounds of blow up your TV, and we talked and talked. Janelle remembered talking about unusual t-shirt slogans. She wrote that this would not be funny these days, but at the time she thought the funniest thing in the world was one that read, I have PMS, and I have a gun. Janelle brought so many adventures to my life. Margie and I joined her in Peru for a week while she dealt with legal issues of adoption and cared for her beautiful 3-month-old daughter. On top of all that, Janelle also planned our wonderful stay, highlighted by tours of Lima and Cusco and hikes up the peaks around Machu Picchu with Brenna in a smugly on her chest. 1 year after my husband and I had moved to California, Janelle proposed a trip to Disneyland with our combined families. Only Janelle could make that sound fun to me. That was. We finished that trip with the performance of Mary Poppins in LA. That famous nanny floating down to the stage was a memorable sight. But more remarkable to me was the question we were asked when we arrived at our pre-theater restaurant. Would you like a limo ride to the theater? Janelle and I looked at each other. Yes, we would. We would like to avoid touring the cavernous underground parking lot. At the end of our meal, we were whisked away, dropped off at the nearest door, and our driver was waiting for us when we came out. It felt truly magical, the way time spent with Janelle often did. When she wrote to me a few months ago to say that her treatment wasn't working, I realized I thought of her as invincible. And she was, in a way. No hike was ever too long, too steep, or too rugged for her. And the generosity of her friendship was boundless.
That was gorgeous. This is Margie Ray. Come on up, Margie.
Okay. Thank you, Janelle, for your adventurous spirit and your love and talent for logistics, whether it was a bike or ski trip down Tensley Canyon, which involves shuttle vehicles, shuttle passengers, shuttle gear, or something farther afield involving a passport. Janelle enticed, but without pressure, others to join into the excursion. The trips were well planned, but there was always room for spontaneity and the unexpected side of excursions. I will paraphrase a few of these invitations that I received over the years. Let's see, at this point we're living in Sheridan, winter of 1986. No kids. Janelle calls me up and says, Phil and I are thinking about going to Mexico, Oaxaca in particular. I've been talking to a travel agent about plane tickets. This is before the internet. Do you want to come along? The travel agent also suggests not waiting until we are in country to find lodging, but to go ahead and book a hotel that caters to tourists for the first night that we're in Mexico. Then, after a good night's sleep, we can ask around about local lodging options and things that travel agents wouldn't know about. After about 3 or 4 hotels, I think we ended up at Marquita Valle and fell in love with that place. But every day we spent half the day looking for it. Early 1989, by then Phil and Janelle are in Wenatchee. I'm living in Houston. I get a phone call from Wenatchee. Phil and I want to take Thor to Oaxaca. We'll stay at that hotel that we eventually discovered on the last trip on the plaza. But how about you and I first go to Guatemala for a week, and we'll look at textiles and talk to weavers, and then we'll meet up with Phil and Thor in Mexico. Contact from Lima, I don't know if there was email by then, summer of 1990. Phil and Janelle are in Lima. We really enjoyed our first month here with baby Brenna. But Phil has to go back to Wenatchee and go back to work. So how about you and Sarah Jane come down for a week or two and hang out with me while I finish up the adoption process. You'll probably want to go to Machu Picchu, but don't get your hopes up on that. Don't make any plans until you get here because things are kind of rocky up in the highlands right now. And when you get to the airport, go ahead and go to the Casa de Cambio and change just enough money so that you can get a cab to the hotel. Once you're here at the hotel with me, then I'll take you over to the street corner where those guys who change money hang out, and I'll show you the ropes. The exchange rate was crazy that summer. I don't know what was going on with the economy. It was a rough summer for spring of 1995. They're in Wenatchee. I'm back in Sheridan. So I'm planning to help Noni with tax returns full-time during the busiest part of the tax season at H&R Block. So if you'd like to come to Wenatchee for 5 weeks and be the nanny for Brenda and Ben. 2 years later, April 1997, they're back in Sheridan, settled in Landon Lane. Brenna and Ben are in bed already, fast asleep. Seems like that new baby is arriving a bit sooner than expected. So could you come out to the house right away, spend the night with the kids? As soon as you get here, Phil's taking me to the hospital. Good times.
That was good too. Brandon.
Can you hear me? Good. It's hard to recognize she is not invincible. Daddy said this about a week before we lost Mom, and it has since then stuck with me. I wanted so badly for her to be just that, invincible. No one was ready to lose her. Truthfully, I don't think we would have ever been ready. There is still so much I wanted to share with her, and she was my first call for all things. Mom and I's relationship was, well, just was. It's hard to explain the exact dynamic as it changed throughout the years. Growing up, I saw my friends' parents being a friend and a parent, which was something I so desperately wanted from Mom, but would not get growing up. My mom was my mom, not a friend, which she pointed out multiple times. Not in a mean way, but explaining that her job was to be my mother first and foremost. This often caused a rift in our relationship that we overcame. Especially after my sweet Eliana was born, Mom and I's relationship grew stronger and stronger. I am happy to report that it only took me until about the age of 30 to realize that my mom would mean just what I needed from a mom. The mom that bought me tacos after a rough day at school. The mom that never missed a piano, choir, musical, or sporting event, even though she loves sports. The mom that made sure every birthday, Christmas, well, any holiday was full of magic. The mom who planned the most incredible vacations, with Daddy's help, of course, I'm sure. The mom who insisted in walking me down the aisle, because it shouldn't just be a dad. The mom who taught me how to be fiercely independent and still be head over heels for my husband. The mom who turned out to be the most amazing grandmother, even as unsure as she was at the beginning. The mom that answered all my calls after any type of minor inconvenience. And I'm telling you, there were a lot. She did all these things, and so much more, all while fighting a battle that lasted a lifetime. Even though she continued to get handed a time limit, she just fought. She fought so that she could laugh with all of us, love all of us, and create these incredible memories with all of us for the last 20 years. When I think of strength, I think of Mom. Not only strength to fight the fight, but also raised 3 kids who all gave her and Dad a run for their money. She had the strength to never miss a hiking or skiing season with her friends. She had the strength to run a business with her husband and brother, retire, and then continue to work in her gardens. She had the strength to go backpacking through Europe with the love of her life. She just did. We were supposed to have therapy the day she passed, which is where I was going to make her sit through me thanking her for everything she had done for me, my children, and husband. Unfortunately, we did not get to have this session. As sad as I was that I did not get to share my long, drawn-out version with her, I was able to get on a condensed version, which I'm sure she appreciated. I was crying, of course, sitting with her on one of her last days. I was telling her how she did so good raising all of us kids, how I was so proud of her for fighting for us, so she could be there for her big moments, and how I loved her so incredibly much. After I finished, she just squeezed my hand and said, "Likewise." Such a Janelle response, if you ask me. I really, truly love her so much, and that love will never fade. In fact, the love that we all have for her will just continue to grow. Even though Daddy's right, no one is truly invincible after all, I'd like to add to his statement. Her physical life may not have been invincible, but her spirit, her love, and her presence in this world is unyielding. She will continue to shine through the family she created and live through us, never truly leaving our sight.
Maya.
Can anyone not hear me? I found out my mother was in hospice in an airport on the way to Maine. One of my best friends from college, Ariel, was getting married, and I was making it work. I don't love traveling, but I made the decision months ago to attend, and so there I was, in an airport, trying to figure out whether I should turn around and book a flight home or keep on going. In the end, both my parents said I should continue on. They thought my mom would have enough time for me to get home after my trip, and besides, my mom always wanted me to experience every joy I could, even when it was inconvenient for her. So I walked into the door of Ariel's house in Maine that Friday, the 16th of June, and the living room was filled with singing. Ariel is Jewish, and it was Shabbat, which is a weekly service of food and song and community. In college, I had a few friends in the Jewish Student Union, and I attended Shabbat with them a handful of times. I'd forgotten how strong of a singer Ariel was. Everyone was singing, and there was food, and many of my friends from college were there, as well as many more kind strangers. My mother has had cancer for almost my entire life. I grew up under the shadow of terminal illness. I always knew I would lose her. For more than 2 decades, I knew I would lose her, and I told myself it wasn't important. The loss wasn't real, and no relationship I ever forged was real either, because none of them would last, because nothing really lasted. I knew even as I made friends that I would lose touch with them, and so it didn't matter to begin with. For 4 years, I hadn't thought much about my friends in the Jewish Student Union, and when I thought about them, I assumed that they hated me. I hadn't kept in touch, hadn't been that close to them. Maybe I'd really been an annoying outsider the whole time. But I walked in, and my mother was in hospice, and they folded me into the music. And it wasn't important that I hadn't talked to most of these people in years, or even that the majority of the people in that living room had never met me before. They were kind to me that weekend. Attending another Shabbat meant more to me because I had experienced it before, even if I hadn't heard any Hebrew in years. It mattered. The experiences I had had and the friendships I had made mattered. Ariel's wedding was beautiful. I danced till I felt empty, and I laughed, and I sprinted across an airport like a maniac on the way back. And when I got back home, my mother was dying in a different way than she had been before. The way I saw her changed almost immediately after her death. Suddenly, I could understand what she'd always said about travel, about cancer. I could see why she pushed herself so hard every summer to plan camping trips, to go to Oregon, to visit Sweden. It was like a film lifted from my eyes. Before, I couldn't see that she was doing it for love, not obligation. My mother loved very deeply. She was a prickly bastard, and she loved so hard it was bigger than her body. She loved enough to follow an incredibly stringent diet for years, to practice for hours, to play whichever song some underprepared UU speaker suggested, to start another business just after she got done with the first one. Everything she did, and she did so much, she did out of love. In her final few years, my mom wrote about how difficult it had become to garden. She couldn't help but mull over things she would never get to see, trees growing out of ugly habits, new beds that she'd never known mature. And yet this spring, my mother planned and planted 3 different garden beds. She, despite her doubts and her fear, she lived with what was there in that exact moment, beauty and weeds both. She knew that the moment mattered, no matter what was on the horizon. The pain didn't invalidate the joy, the love, and the beauty. Coming back home for her service, I go out to her garden and I pick strawberries and raspberries right from the vine. I fill my mouth, handful after handful, tasting the sunshine and the soil she cultivated, the water and care she showered on them for years and years. To me, this is my mother. Abundance and generosity, love and persistent care, no matter what it took, to plan and plant and water and prune, summer after summer. She wanted everyone to have not just what they needed, but more than enough. My mother loved and she lived and mattered. Her life was joy and pain, and she was alive for it. She was alive for every second of her life, even when it hurt, even when it was incredibly difficult. My mother was an amazing writer and pianist and hiker, and so many other things. And she taught herself how to get up no matter what. And in the last days of her life, she was lying down in pain. And she was alive. I've known I was going to lose my mother since before I could remember. I'm so, so grateful that I got to have her for as long as I did. I'm so grateful for everything she taught me and every stupid vacation she dragged me along on, for the gardens she planted and the lives she touched, to the very last days and beyond. When I read some of my mother's writings after her death, from the time she was my age or a bit older, I found a person I never really got to know before. She wrote about trembling aspen leaves, and I could predict the cadence of it. It was exactly how I would have finished the sentence myself. She talked about getting diagnosed and how weird it was to think of herself as a cancer patient when she just sprinted across an airport to get to an appointment. I recognized myself in my mother in a way I never had before, and I'm incredibly grateful to have known her again after her death, to have been touched and shaped by her love and her effort and her joy, and yes, her sadness, her illness, her pain. I found out that my mother was going into hospice on the way to a wedding. May all our lives contain such joy, such sadness, and the strength to live with them both.
Fantastic. Phil.
Can you hear me? Now? Thank you all for coming today to share some memories of Janelle. Janelle is the love of my life. We spent 41 years together, and I miss her terribly. I've always been in awe of her ability to organize and keep track of in many parts of our lives. I was constantly asking her where I left my phone, my wallet, my hat, my fly rod, and everything else. She loved making lists and crossing things off as they were accomplished. She managed the adoption of Brenna and Ben, including all the legal work, documentation, and traveling. She even managed to fit in some sightseeing to Machu Picchu with friends in Peru, complete with diapers and formula for baby Brenna during that adoption. Margie's given you an idea of how Janelle loved to travel. She managed to organize trips for spring breaks with our kids and grandkids, backpacking and horsepacking, camping trips in the backcountry, hiking with friends, fishing trips, long walks, biking trips. We traveled to Sweden twice to visit our son, Thor, an exchange student that's from our in our marriage, to Hawaii several times, to Mexico a couple times, and to New Zealand once. She arranged a company trip to England to visit the destination garden centers, and later a trip to England for walking tours with me. Trips to San Diego, Los Angeles, the Redwoods, the Oregon coast, Vancouver, British Columbia, New Mexico, Seattle multiple times, trips to Vermont, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Boston, and Maine. She even went on an African safari in Kenya, the Florida Everglades, and the Minnesota Boundary Waters. She grabbed every opportunity to travel and enjoy life, even fitting side trips to various national and state parks into the required medical trips. Janelle was an instigator. She was one of the initial hikeristas, a group of women who got together most Wednesdays for a hike or a ski someplace around town or in the Bighorns. Janelle was talking to one of the early market vendors when he was grousing about the downtown Thursday farmers market. He said it was mostly a craft market on a bad day for farmers to attend. Janelle ran with it and started Landon's Farmers Market on Saturdays, insisting that it be food and flowers rather than crafts. During the winter months, when the greenhouse wasn't packed with bedding plants, we moved the market inside, giving the vendors a year-round venue on a farmer-friendly day of the week. When spring came and the weather was, hopefully, better, the store was packed with plants, the market moved outside. This also provided some much-needed traffic for the store, so it was a win-win for everybody. From just a few regular vendors, the market has grown to more than 20, and Janelle is very proud of this accomplishment. She didn't love cold, gray winter days, but she loved cross-country skiing, and we went as often as possible to the Bighorns, Yellowstone Park, or on several memorable ski trips to the Bozeman area or Red Lodge. She relished those days when the snow was drifting into the ski tracks behind us. Her college degree was in biology because she decided pre-med would lead to some sort of medical profession, and she didn't want to be around sick people. Oops. She learned so much about her cancer that in the end she knew more than a good many of the doctors who were treating her. She wasn't bashful about quizzing her oncologist about why they were recommending drugs that she had already used to ill effect, or pointing out when a nurse broke the sterile field while administering an IV. She did not shy away from second opinions or trying non-standard of care treatments. Simply managing all the supplements, appointments, and treatments she used to fight off the cancer for so long was a full-time job for anyone. She simply refused to bow to the standard of care or the standard prognosis. She loved to play piano for church, and I miss hearing her practice. In addition to the hymns, she loved to throw in pop songs, ragtime, Mannheim Steamroller Christmas songs, Gershwin, Mozart, Bach, and Beethoven. I have just a few recordings of her practice. For 23 years, Janelle was the driving force behind the transition of Landon's from a successful mom-and-pop country store operation to a thriving garden center on the edge of town. She helped orchestrate relocation from Landon Lane to College Meadows and managed the books on the side while raising our children. We are proud that Landon's has continued to improve even after our retirement. She always loved gardening and was very proud that she was able to complete 3 flower gardens this spring at her house. Even after retirement, she organized Lupin Lane Food and Flowers with Maya and me, using the resources at our home to become a vendor in the farmers market she instigated. The bouquets here today are from her gardens. We also have some flower seed packs from her personal stash that we hope you will take and plant in your gardens. Janelle is a doer and doesn't easily adjust to anyone who is lackadaisical or forgetful like me. Lucky for me, she made an exception.
Life is worth the living. It is good and it is beautiful despite and because of its tragedy. We glory in life, confident that its goodness is pervasive, that it is part of the texture of life, that it is of the essence of the nature of things. This confidence in the goodness of life is more profound than we perhaps suspect. Janelle was someone who understood that the good in life is everywhere. She was constantly seeking out and creating beauty. When we remember her, we can't help but remember all of the good things she did, and we can't help but feel our sorrow that she is gone. Knowing sorrow allows us to love life all the more, even as we rebel against separation and pain. Sorrow is part of the goodness of life. We must go on and be alive for our lives, however difficult it may be, however difficult it may at times seem. We've all been touched by Janelle and all the things that she built. Living and enjoying our life is how we must honor the memory of Janelle, who understood just how good life really is. Finally, a few housekeeping things. Brian Bergland, as Phil mentioned, prepared some packets of seeds from Janelle's stashes. Please take one. The grandkids will be handing them out, and take a piece of her home with you. We also have a guest book over on the seeds. We'd really appreciate it if everyone would sign it. Janelle presented a talk called Out of the Mouth of Babes, or Mindfulness, Danger, and UU Theology for UU in 2022. It's a great example of her writing and an apt description of her view on life. I have a few printed copies up here. It is also available online through the Sheridan Unitarian Universalist website. Additionally, there are several copies of the Sheridan Press, which has Janelle's obituary, backed by the seeds. We're going to have some music tonight after the band members have had a chance to eat, which you are welcome to dance to. As we eat, please feel free to come up to the mic right here and share some more stories with all of us about Janelle. We are working to have a low waste event and are reusing, recycling, and composting. When we're done eating, please take your plates and waste to the porch east, back through those doors. There are signs on the buckets telling you what goes where. We do need to set up the potluck tables to eat now. There's no big rush because many hands make light work. But all the chairs can be moved to the side, and tables can be brought out in the middle. Tablecloths put on, flowers moved out, and we'll have a great feast. Please stick around and join us for dinner, dancing, and music, and thank you for all of you for being here.